The alarm went off early, as always, and the responsible son got up without complaining. The kitchen was already filled with the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread, prepared by him before his parents woke up. The house was old, with wooden windows that creaked when opened, but it still held the warmth of a home. He walked through the halls like someone who knows every detail, every shadow, and every memory. His routine was quiet, marked by small gestures that no one seemed to notice. As he set the table, he thought about the overdue bills and the medicine he needed to buy for his father. His tight budget barely covered everything, but he always found a way. The sacrifices had already become part of his life, like an invisible mark he carried with resignation. There was no luxury, no trips, no adventures, just the steady rhythm of care. Despite the tiredness, there was also a sense of purpose in every repeated action. His father, already frail, appeared slowly in the hallway, leaning on his cane. The son rushed to help him, settling him into his chair and pouring his coffee. The old man smiled, but said nothing more than a faint "good morning." That was enough for the son, though a part of him wished to hear words of recognition. His parents' silence was becoming heavier and heavier. After coffee, he tended to the backyard, collected clothes from the line, and organized the preparations for the birthday party that would happen later. It was an important milestone, his father's 70th birthday, and he wanted everything to be perfect. Even with no help from anyone, he saw the responsibility as something natural. Life had taught him not to expect anything in return. In the living room, the old photos caught his attention. There were pictures from their childhood, of him next to his brother, both still young, smiling innocently. But those memories now hurt, because time and distance had turned their relationship into silence. His brother had left years ago, leaving behind only the shadow of an absence that was never explained. And he, alone, had stayed to care for what remained. The son sighed, feeling the weight on his shoulders. His heart carried unspoken hurts that throbbed like open wounds. Still, he remained steady, like a pillar holding everything up, even as it threatened to crumble. The party was his chance to show his father that everything he had done had been worth it. In the afternoon, his mother came into the kitchen, tired but excited for the celebration. She talked about the relatives arriving, the food that would be served, and the memories that would be shared. The son just nodded, helping with every detail without really being seen. The feeling of invisibility grew, like a shadow following his every move. As evening began to fall, the first guests started to arrive. Laughter, hugs, and stories filled the house, making the atmosphere lively. The son worked hard to welcome everyone, making sure nothing was missing. Yet, as everyone enjoyed themselves, he felt increasingly distant, like an invisible observer in the middle of his own creation.
Deep down, he was afraid that the night would just be another example of how things always were. Him behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly while nobody noticed. But he still held out hope that his father, faced with the party he had organized, would finally recognize his dedication. When he looked at the clock, he realized the night was just beginning. A strange feeling came over him, as if something unexpected was about to happen. He had no idea that this birthday would forever change the way he saw his family. This is just the first part of this story, full of emotions and family secrets. If you've ever felt forgotten after giving your all for someone, subscribe to the channel now to follow this journey and see just how far it will go. The main living room was decorated with golden balloons and silver ribbons that shimmered under the warm yellow light. The table with the birthday cake was full of colorful desserts and dishes prepared with care, all arranged by the son. It was a scene worthy of pride, but inside him, he still felt the emptiness of someone who didn't know if he would be remembered. Relatives arrived in groups, bringing gifts and stories from the past. The father, sitting in a special armchair in the middle of the room, smiled as he saw each new visitor. The son stood nearby, making sure everything was under control. He greeted everyone, but it felt like no one truly noticed he was there. Conversations spread through the room like waves, full of laughter and memories. His mother moved among the guests, proudly showing off her husband, while the son took refuge in small tasks. He cleared plates, refilled glasses, kept things in order. To everyone else, he was just the quiet support keeping the party going. Inside, however, he dreamed of a simple gesture, a tight hug from his father, a sincere word of thanks, something that would give meaning to all those years of sacrifice. With every minute that passed, that wish seemed further away, buried under layers of indifference. The father received tributes from cousins, neighbors, and even old friends. Everyone praised his life, his strength, and the family he had built. The son listened in silence, waiting for his turn to be recognized. But that moment never came. The space around him seemed to be shrinking. While the guests enjoyed themselves, he felt trapped in a reality that no one else saw. The contrast between the joy of the party and his own loneliness was overwhelming. With every burst of laughter, his feeling of exclusion grew. He was an essential part of the evening, yet at the same time, he felt like a detail that could easily be forgotten. Amid the commotion, the son's heart started beating faster, as if something unexpected was about to happen. He had no idea that this birthday would forever change the way he saw his family.
The guests began to whisper, looking toward the entrance with anticipation. The son followed their gaze and saw the figure walking through the door. A chill ran down his spine when he recognized who it was. There, standing before everyone, was his long-lost brother. The prodigal son, after years of being gone, had returned home. The party stopped for a few seconds before applause and tears filled the room. The son, however, felt only the weight of an old wound being reopened. The night that was supposed to be a celebration was turning into the start of an even greater conflict. The initial silence in the room only lasted a few seconds, but it was long enough for the son to feel his heart race. Everyone moved toward the newcomer, their faces full of surprise and emotion. The brother who had disappeared for years was right there, smiling as if he had never left. The joy of the guests stood in stark contrast to the son's quiet shock. The father, upon seeing his absent son, struggled to rise from his armchair. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face, and the crowd watched the reunion as if it were a performance. Their embrace was long and filled with emotion, drawing applause and sighs from the moved onlookers. The son, standing in the background, watched the scene like a man watching his own shadow take form. Their mother rushed into the prodigal son's arms, repeating his name like a mantra of relief. Her voice trembled with happiness, and the light in her eyes left no doubt. For her, that moment was the most important of the entire night. The son felt his throat go dry, wondering where the joy was for everything he had done. The guests began to crowd around the prodigal son, everyone wanting to hear his stories. He spoke charmingly, flashed smiles, and received warm hugs. The son quietly stepped away, preferring the company of the kitchen to the spectacle of idolization taking place in the living room. As he swapped out cups and straightened trays, he thought about how unfair life seemed. Years of dedication, sleepless nights, constant worry,
All of it seemed erased in an instant by his brother's simple return. There was no recognition for him, only the glow of the reunion. Memories of the past came back like a punch to the gut. He remembered their childhood, the plans they made together, and how it all fell apart when his brother chose to leave without a word. Since then, he had been left with the burden of responsibility. And now, seeing him back, it was as if all the weight he had carried had been for nothing. His father, beaming, called for everyone to gather around. The prodigal son was introduced as the hero who had returned, and the speeches praised his courage for showing up after so long. Once again, the son was not mentioned. The silence felt heavier than 1,000 words. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just a spectator. He was a stranger within his own family. The place he believed was his was being taken, and there was no room for his feelings. His resentment was beginning to turn into anger.
The cold look he gave his brother did not go unnoticed. The prodigal son saw it, but said nothing, only responding with a timid smile. That gesture, instead of calming him, made the son's heart burn even more. And so the party that was meant to be a celebration of unity became the stage for a silent conflict that was just beginning to take shape. As the hours passed, the presence of the prodigal brother continued to draw everyone's attention. He told stories of his adventures, spoke of faraway places, and drew laughter from the crowd. The father listened to every word with shining eyes, as if witnessing a dream come true. The son watched from a distance, unable to hide the bitterness growing inside him. With every laugh that echoed through the room, he felt more and more invisible. It was as if everyone had forgotten that without him, none of this would have been possible. The decorations, the food, the care for their father, everything went unnoticed in the face of the triumphant return. The weight of their indifference became unbearable. At one point, an aunt commented loudly about how wonderful it was to see the family finally complete. Her words felt like a dagger to the son's heart, and he wondered if all the time he had spent there had just been a way to fill a temporary void. Was he, after all, just a disposable placeholder? As he served the guests, he overheard conversations comparing the two brothers. Some spoke of the prodigal son's courage to return, as if that were a greater virtue than years of steady dedication. The son clenched his fists, holding back the urge to respond. His brother, meanwhile, seemed to be trying to reach out, glancing shyly in his direction. But each attempt was met with an averted gaze or a curt reply. A wall of resentment was rising between them, tall and solid. Their mother, sensing the tension, tried to ease the situation by calling them both to stand beside their father. But the closeness only increased the discomfort. While the prodigal son was embraced with enthusiasm, the son stood motionless, like a forgotten shadow in the corner of the room. Their father, unaware of his responsible son's inner turmoil, kept smiling and expressing his gratitude for the prodigal son's return. For him, this was the reunion he had waited years for. For the son, it was a portrait of ingratitude. As the night went on, the guests continued to praise the brother who had returned, while the other lost himself in bitter thoughts. Every word seemed to reinforce the idea that his presence had never been enough. When he looked at his brother again, he saw not just a rival, but the thief of everything he had quietly built. And in that moment, he understood that this party wasn't just about their father. It was about the invisible struggle for recognition he had been fighting all along.
The night wore on, and the tension kept building. The son knew he wouldn't be able to stay quiet for much longer. Something inside him was about to snap. With every passing minute, the difference between the two brothers became more obvious. The prodigal son, with his charismatic way, dominated the conversations and won everyone's attention. People gathered around him like moths to a flame, fascinated by his stories of travel and adventure. The son, however, remained in the shadows, invisible in the eyes of his own family. As he watched from a distance, a mix of feelings consumed him. There was pride at seeing his brother finally there, but also anger at being constantly overshadowed. It was as if a lifetime of effort had been erased in just a few hours. The prodigal son's glow made his own presence feel like a mere detail. His father, emotional, couldn't stop praising the son who had returned. He talked about how he had always believed this day would come, how he had never lost hope. The son heard these words like a series of stabs to the heart. Where were the words for him, the one who had never left? Where was the recognition for all the years of care? Meanwhile, the guests laughed loudly, raised their glasses, and celebrated the prodigal son's courage. It was as if the past had been forgotten, as if his mistakes had been turned into glorious achievements. In silence, the son felt his heart fill with hurt. He knew no one would remember the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, or the burden he had carried alone. His mother, with tears in her eyes, gently touched the prodigal son's face. She said the lost time didn't matter because now they were together again. The son looked away, unable to bear the scene. For him, the lost time was all that was left. Despite the pain, he tried to convince himself that he shouldn't ruin his father's night. But the more he saw his brother being praised, the harder it became to hold back the resentment. His mind filled with unanswered questions. Had all his sacrifice been for nothing? The prodigal son, noticing the distance, tried to start a conversation a few times. He asked about the daily routine, about their parents, about the house. But the son replied with short answers, avoiding direct eye contact. It was as if every word was a silent battle. The strain between them was palpable, even without an open argument. A few guests noticed the tension but chose to ignore it, diving back into the prodigal son's captivating stories. For everyone else, it was a night of celebration, but for the son, it was an open wound. Deep down, he wanted to scream, to reveal to everyone the weight he had carried alone, but the words wouldn't come. The shadow that surrounded him seemed to trap not just his body, but his soul as well. And as the party continued with laughter and applause, the son felt that every smile directed at his brother was another cruel reminder of his own invisibility.
As the guests were warmed by the joy of the evening, the prodigal son stood up, holding a gift in his hands. The room fell silent immediately, everyone eager to see what he had prepared. The son, standing at the back, crossed his arms and watched coldly. He knew that this moment would only emphasize his exclusion even more. The prodigal son handed his father a small wooden box, crafted with delicate details. Inside was an antique watch, carefully restored, that had belonged to their grandfather. The object held immense sentimental value, and upon seeing it, his father broke down in tears. The audience applauded, moved by the deeply meaningful gift. Right after, his brother began a speech. He spoke about longing, regret, and the importance of family. He asked for forgiveness for his absence and promised that from then on he would truly be present. His words echoed through the room like a healing balm, moving everyone there. His father hugged him tightly, repeating how happy he was to have his son back. The son felt his chest burn, not because of the words themselves, but because of his family's reaction. With every tear shed, with every enthusiastic round of applause, he felt himself being erased, reduced to nothing. It was as if all his care and sacrifice meant nothing compared to a simple speech. He tried to convince himself that this was just a passing emotion, but he couldn't. The wound grew deeper with every second. The resentment, which had been silent until then, was beginning to turn into something more dangerous, a desire to confront. While his brother was praised as a hero, the son remained in the corner. the image of the watch etched in his mind. He thought about how he had held that household together, kept his parents on their feet, and yet he wasn't remembered. To him, the watch symbolized not just the past, but the injustice of the present. A few relatives came over to praise the prodigal son's gesture, commenting on how beautiful it was to see a child who could acknowledge his mistakes. The son listened without reacting, but inside he was screaming. Couldn't anyone see his pain? Couldn't anyone see the glaring difference between the one who never left and the one who only now returned? His father, emotional, asked for silence so he could give thanks. He said that was the best gift he could have received, having the whole family together. To the son, however, those words sounded like a final judgment. It was as if his steadfastness wasn't enough. The room erupted in applause again, and the prodigal son was swept up in hugs. The son, meanwhile, discreetly stepped away, unable to bear the scene any longer. He went into the kitchen, where the noise was quieter, and let out a heavy sigh. There, in the silence of the kitchen, he realized that something inside him had broken. The party, which had started as a point of pride, had become a bitter memory. And more than ever, he knew he couldn't stay silent for much longer.
By the time the guests were warmed by the evening's joy, the prodigal son stood up with a gift in his hands. The room immediately fell silent, everyone eager to see what he had brought. Standing in the back, the son crossed his arms and watched coldly. He knew this moment would only make his own exclusion more pronounced. The prodigal son handed his father a small wooden box, intricately carved with delicate details. Inside was an antique watch, carefully restored, that had belonged to their grandfather. The object held immense sentimental value, and when his father saw it, he broke down in tears. The crowd applauded, moved by the deeply meaningful gift. Then his brother began to speak. He talked about how much he had missed them, his regrets, and the importance of family. He asked for forgiveness for his absence and promised that from that day forward he would truly be present. His words washed over the room like a balm, moving everyone who heard them. His father hugged him tightly, repeating how happy he was to have his son back. The son felt a burning in his chest, not because of the words themselves, but because of his family's reaction. With every tear that was shed, with every enthusiastic round of applause, he felt himself being erased, reduced to nothing. It was as if all his years of care and sacrifice were worthless compared to a single speech. He tried to convince himself it was just a passing emotion, but he couldn't. The wound grew deeper with every second. The resentment, which had been silent until then, began to transform into something more dangerous, a desire to confront. While his brother was celebrated as a hero, the son stayed in the corner, the image of the watch fixed in his mind. He thought about how he had held that household together, how he had supported his parents, and yet he wasn't even remembered. To him, the watch symbolized not just the past, but the injustice of the present. A few relatives came over to praise the prodigal son's gesture, remarking how beautiful it was to see a son who could acknowledge his mistakes. The son listened without reacting, but inside he was screaming. Couldn't anyone see his pain? Couldn't anyone see the glaring difference between the one who never left and the one who only just returned? His father, overcome with emotion, asked for quiet so he could say thank you. He said that this was the best gift he could have received, having his entire family together again. To the son, however, those words sounded like a final judgment. It was as if his own unwavering presence wasn't enough. The room burst into applause once more, and the prodigal son was swallowed up in hugs. The son, in turn, discreetly stepped away, unable to bear the scene any longer. He slipped into the kitchen, where the noise was muffled, and let out a heavy sigh. There, in the quiet of the kitchen, he realized that something inside him had broken. The party, which had begun as a point of pride, had become a bitter memory, and more than ever, he knew he couldn't stay silent much longer.
In the kitchen, the son leaned his hands on the sink and let his head hang forward. The distant noise of laughter and applause was muffled, but it still irritated him like a constant echo. His eyes fixed on the floor, and the pent-up anger seemed to explode inside his chest. He thought about all the years that had passed, the sleepless nights taking care of his father when his health failed, the times he gave up personal dreams to stay at home, even the invitations he turned down so his parents wouldn't be alone. Every sacrifice now felt like a useless burden in the face of the idolization of his brother. In silence, he began talking to himself, as if the walls could hear. "What was the point of all this?" he murmured, his voice choked. "Does my life have no value? Does it only matter who leaves and comes back a hero?" The outburst was just words thrown into the void, but it brought a bitter relief. He picked up a glass of water, but his hands were trembling so much the water almost spilled. He took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together, but the feeling of invisibility wouldn't go away. It was as if his identity had been erased by his brother's presence. Meanwhile, images from the past flooded his mind. He remembered when they were children, and his brother already displayed the same charisma that now charmed everyone. He, more shy and reserved, always stayed in the background. Perhaps, deep down, that was the destiny life had reserved for him. The son sat alone at the kitchen table, away from the party. He listened to the muffled sound of the speech still echoing from the living room. Every word seemed to repeat his own exclusion. He closed his eyes and let the pain trickle out in the form of quiet tears. He thought about leaving, about walking out of the party he himself helped build, but something inside him wouldn't allow it. It was his father's birthday, and despite everything, he didn't want to disappoint him. This dilemma consumed him, leaving him torn between escape and resistance. His mother came into the kitchen for a moment, but she didn't notice the intensity of his feelings. She just asked him to help bring out some more plates before hurriedly returning to the living room. Once again, he felt like an invisible employee, someone who was only good for keeping things in order. He took a deep breath and wiped his face. He knew he couldn't hide the anger for much longer. Sooner or later, he would have to face the situation. The silence of years couldn't last forever. Hearing another round of applause from the living room, he muttered to himself, "This isn't going to stay like this." And with that thought, he stood up, ready for the next clash he knew was inevitable. As he discreetly returned to the living room, the son tried to blend in with the guests, but his gaze was fixed on his brother. He watched his every gesture, every word, as if searching for a sign of falseness. Deep down, he wanted a justification for the resentment he felt.
It was at that moment that he accidentally overheard a conversation in the hallway. Two relatives were whispering about the real reason for the prodigal son's return. He hadn't come back just for the party. He had found out that his father was seriously ill and decided to reappear. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The son stood frozen, feeling a wave of indignation rush through his body. For him, this confirmed his suspicions. His brother hadn't returned out of love, but out of convenience, and now he was reaping the rewards of a false redemption. His heart racing, he moved away from the guests to process what he had just heard. His mind was boiling, a mix of anger and sadness. He thought about how it all seemed like a farce, as if life were a play where he was always cast in a supporting role. In the living room, his brother continued to laugh, to hug, to charm. To everyone else, he was a repentant son, worthy of praise. To the son, he was just an opportunist,
someone who only came back when the end was near. His father, unaware of everything, remained emotional. With every look he gave the prodigal son, his happiness was evident. The son felt his chest tighten, realizing he couldn't reveal the truth without destroying the moment. The dilemma was suffocating him. Amid the turmoil, he remembered all the times he was alone by his father's side, during doctor's appointments, through feverish nights, after quiet falls. His brother was never there, and now he was receiving all the recognition just for showing up. A lump formed in his throat, and he had to step outside into the backyard. The cool night air didn't ease his pain. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify the emptiness he carried. The moon lit up the sky, but inside him there was only darkness. There, alone, he made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let that lie go unpunished. If his brother had only come out of convenience, he would be the first to expose him. The confrontation could no longer be postponed. And in that instant, he knew the party was about to change tone. What had been a reunion full of emotion was going to turn into revelations capable of shaking the entire family. The son walked back into the house with firm steps, a racing heart, and a mind filled with a storm of thoughts. He found his brother in the hallway, momentarily isolated, looking at some old photos hanging on the wall. The scene looked innocent, but to him it felt like a provocation. It was time to say everything he had been holding back. Without any small talk, he approached and said in a cold tone, "So that's why you came back? Because Dad is sick?" His brother turned around, surprised, trying to smile, but he quickly saw the seriousness in the son's eyes. The silence between them was heavier than any response. The prodigal son tried to explain himself, saying he missed the family, that he had always thought about returning, but fear and shame had held him back. The son interrupted, accusing him of abandonment, of selfishness, of leaving the entire burden of responsibility on his shoulders. The words came out like stabs, each one loaded with years of pent-up resentment.
His brother took a deep breath, and for the first time that night, let his mask of confidence fall. With tears in his eyes, he admitted he was wrong, that he ran away because he couldn't handle the weight of expectations, but that he was now trying to make things right. The son, however, didn't believe him. He saw only convenient excuses in his words. The tension grew. Their voices rose, and the two began to argue more intensely. The prodigal son insisted that he wanted a fresh start, while the responsible son shot back that it was too late. Years of pent-up anger overflowed, and neither seemed willing to back down. At the height of the argument, their father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. His tired face showed concern, and his eyes pleaded for silence. He asked them both not to ruin the night, reminding them that the party was meant to celebrate life, not to expose old wounds. Even so, the son couldn't contain his furious expression. He just walked away, leaving his brother alone in the room with their father. He felt suffocated, as if every word spoken had only widened the gap between them. His brother stayed silent, ashamed in front of their father. The weight of the argument shook him, but it also revealed that his return wouldn't be easy. The past couldn't be erased with a speech or a gift. While the party continued in the living room, a much larger conflict had begun behind the scenes. And for the son, that conversation was just the start of an emotional war that would have consequences for a long time. After the argument, the son retreated to the kitchen again, trying to control his breathing. Anger pulsed through his veins, but there was also a deep pain that left him feeling vulnerable. It was then that his mother came in,
noticing the tension written all over his face. She approached slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. In a calm voice, she asked him to try to understand his brother. She said that everyone makes mistakes, but that the family could only move forward if there was forgiveness. Her words were gentle, but to him they felt like a knife twisting in the wound. Shaken, the son asked his mother if she didn't see all that he had done. He asked if she didn't notice the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the constant dedication. His mother, emotional, replied that she had always known, but that she didn't want to lose either of her sons. For her, having the prodigal son back was a relief that couldn't be denied. His mother's words only deepened his feeling of exclusion. The son realized that even she, who should have recognized his efforts above all else, seemed to value his brother's return more than his own steadfast presence. That hurt him in a way that was almost unbearable.
As his mother spoke about unity, he felt more and more alone. It was as if the whole world was against him, as if his pain wasn't legitimate. And this feeling of invisibility only fed his resentment. The prodigal son, meanwhile, stayed in the living room, trying to pull himself together after the argument. A few relatives noticed his downcast expression and offered him support. This only reinforced the idea in the son's mind that his brother would always come out looking like the victim, while he would be seen as bitter and inflexible. Seeing that she couldn't convince him, his mother just sighed and asked that, at least for that night, he try to keep the peace. She said their father couldn't handle any more conflict and that he needed to feel the family was united. These words landed on the son's heart like an even heavier weight. He nodded, but inside, he knew the peace wouldn't last long. The wounds were too raw to heal in silence. And deep down, he wanted more than ever to get the whole truth out, no matter the cost. As his mother left the kitchen, leaving him alone again, the son realized this war wasn't just against his brother. It was also against himself, against the feelings that were tearing him apart inside. And that night, between the laughter in the living room and the hidden tears in the hallways, the family was moving toward an inevitable breaking point. The son moved even further from the party, walking through the halls of the lit-up house. Every room seemed to hold a memory. But that night, everything had a bitter taste. The sound of music and laughter from the living room contrasted with the heavy silence inside him. He felt like a ghost, present but ignored, surrounded by people who couldn't see his pain. He reached the room where he had spent so much of his life caring for his father. The smell of medicine and the sight of the support chair next to the bed made his heart ache. He remembered the endless nights he had rushed to help his father during health crises. In those moments, he was the only one there, while everyone else was far away. He sat on the edge of the bed and let his eyes wander over the old photographs on the shelf. There was one of him and his brother as children, smiling next to their parents. For a few moments, he missed that time, when there was still camaraderie and the weight of life hadn't torn them apart. But the memory was quickly smothered by reality. As he stared at the portrait, tears welled up without his permission. They weren't just tears of anger, but also of loneliness. The feeling of always being the family's support system and never the celebrated son was eating away at his strength. The silence of the room amplified his darkest thoughts. Deep down, a voice repeated, "No one cares. No one notices what you've done." And he, tired, was starting to believe it. The shadow of loneliness seemed to swallow him whole.
From outside the room, the voices continued, lively and animated. His brother, with his natural charisma, was charming the guests more and more. The contrast between the party and his own pain was so stark it felt cruel. He wondered if he should just walk out the door and never come back. But something kept him there. His love for his father, despite everything, was stronger than any hurt. He didn't want to abandon the man who, even without words of recognition, had always been his priority. This dilemma made him stay, even if his presence went ignored. He lay down on the bed for a moment, trying to calm his thoughts. But every heartbeat seemed to carry a mixture of resentment and sadness. It was as if his soul was torn between the desire to be seen and the wish to disappear. When he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. The sound brought him back to reality, reminding him that he couldn't hide forever. The confrontation with his pain was only just beginning, and soon he would have to face it in front of everyone. The son got up, and as he left the room, he came face to face with his father, who was walking slowly, leaning on his cane. His expression was tired, but also full of concern. He motioned for his son to sit with him in a quieter corner of the house, away from the party's noise. In a weak voice, his father said he could feel the tension in the air. He didn't need an explanation to understand that the brothers were in conflict. He looked deeply into his son's eyes and asked him to be patient, to not let anger destroy the family. His words were filled with sincerity and love. The son tried to hold back his tears, but he couldn't. He poured out his heart about the years of dedication, the pain of never being recognized, the wound that grew deeper every time he saw his brother being praised. His voice trembled, heavy with resentment and exhaustion. His father held his hand with a surprising strength for someone so frail. He said he had never failed to notice his efforts, that every caring gesture was etched in his heart, even when silence kept him from speaking. He confessed that what he wanted most was to see his two sons united before he passed away. The words touched the son deeply. It was the first time he had heard something so direct about his own worth. But at the same time, his father's request felt like a heavy burden. Forgiving his brother wasn't simple, not after so many years of abandonment and pain. At that moment, the prodigal son approached, calling for his father. He found them sitting together and noticed the tears on his responsible brother's face. The atmosphere grew thick with emotion, and for a few seconds, no one said a word. Their father then repeated his plea, this time to both of them. He said his greatest happiness would be to pass away in peace, knowing his sons were reconciled. The emotion in his voice made both brothers lower their heads, unable to respond immediately.
The son felt torn. Part of him wanted to honor his father's wish, but another part was still held captive by resentment. His brother, for his part, seemed willing to bend, but was waiting for a chance to show his sincerity. In that moment, the weight of the decision hung over all three of them. The family's future depended not just on time, but on the choice to let go of pride. And for the first time, the son realized that he might have to sacrifice his own pain to give peace to the man he loved most. The silence that followed their father's plea felt heavier than any words. The son looked at his brother, and in his eyes he saw both regret and fragility. It was the first time in years they were face to face, without masks or an audience. The weight of the past fell on them both, demanding to be confronted once and for all. The prodigal son, gathering his courage, said he was wrong, that he ran away because he didn't know how to handle the responsibilities. He confessed he had envied his brother's discipline and steadfastness, but also felt ashamed that he couldn't measure up. His words were filled with pain, and for the first time, they seemed genuine. The son, however, couldn't contain his anger. He shot back that while his brother was running away, someone had to stay, and that someone was always him. He asked if his brother had any idea of the price he had paid, the dreams he had abandoned,
the youth he had lost caring for their parents. Each sentence was an accusation, and tears streamed down his face. The prodigal son tried to step closer, but his brother pushed him away with a sharp gesture. He said he didn't want easy apologies, that words wouldn't erase years of absence. To him, the return felt more like convenience than true love. The argument intensified. Their raised voices echoed through the hallways, drawing the attention of some relatives. But inside the room, it was as if only the two of them existed, trapped in a whirlwind of hurt, regret, and pride. Their father, emotional, intervened with great effort, begging them to stop. He said he couldn't bear to see them destroying each other like that, and that life was too short to hold on to grudges. His words, though frail, resonated like a desperate cry. At that moment, the son felt the full weight of the choice before him. He knew he could remain trapped in his resentment, but he also knew it would cost his father's peace. The dilemma choked him, leaving him in silent tears. His brother, through his own tears, reached out a hand begging for a chance to rebuild. He said he didn't want to take the son's place, only to stand beside him. The sincerity in his voice shook the walls the responsible son had built up over so many years. The room was charged, as if something could break at any moment. The argument was no longer about who was right, but about the future they might still build together. And in that instant, they both realized it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about their father's desire to see his family restored before he was gone.
Tears continued to stream down the son's face. He looked at his brother's outstretched hand, as if staring into an abyss. He knew that taking it meant letting go of some of the pain he carried, but he also recognized that refusing would mean condemning his father to sadness in his final days. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he saw his father watching them with a pleading look. That single detail was enough to break his final resistance. With a hesitant gesture, he took his brother's hand, even though his heart remained divided. The prodigal son smiled through his tears, gripping the hand firmly. He said he didn't expect to be forgiven immediately, but that he would do everything to regain the lost trust. His words sounded like a promise, sincere and full of vulnerability. He didn't reply right away. He just nodded, like someone acknowledging that there was still a long road ahead. The anger didn't disappear, but the impenetrable barrier began to crumble. The simple act of accepting the hand was a first step. Their father, emotional, let out a sob of relief. He said that was the most valuable gift he could have received, to see his sons giving peace a chance. His words filled the room with a different energy, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. The two brothers, still shaken, remained silent for a few moments, just exchanging looks filled with memories and unspoken promises. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but a beginning, an opening for a new start. Some relatives watching from a distance felt the impact of the moment. The party, once marked by tension and resentment, began to take on a new meaning. The reunion was no longer just about the prodigal son and the family, but also about the brothers themselves. The son, though hesitant, realized that yielding wasn't weakness, it was an act of love for his father, a sacrifice that might bring him peace in the future. The pain was still there, but now there was also hope. And in that instant, he understood that reconciliation didn't erase the past, but it offered the chance to build a new present. The first step had been taken, and although the path was long, he knew he was no longer alone. The night grew late, and the party came to an end. The last guests said their goodbyes, still moved by the reunion they had witnessed. The house, once loud and full of voices, now settled into a serene silence. The son remained seated beside his father, while his brother helped their mother clear away some plates. His father held the responsible son's hand firmly, as if wanting to sear the feeling into his memory forever. In a weak voice, he said he could now rest in peace because he knew his sons were trying to understand each other. Those words brought tears back to the son's eyes, but this time they weren't just tears of pain. There was also relief.
The prodigal son approached, and without asking permission, placed his hand over the sons and their fathers. The simple gesture symbolized a silent promise of unity. The son hesitated for a moment, but did not pull his hand away. For the first time in years, he felt that perhaps he wasn't as alone as he had thought. That night, the hurts didn't disappear, but something had changed. The resentment still existed, but now it shared space with hope. The son realized that his dedication had never been in vain. It was the foundation that held the family together until his brother found the courage to return. A short time later, their father fell asleep in his armchair, a serene smile on his face. The son and his brother watched him in silence, sharing a quiet understanding they hadn't experienced since childhood. It was as if, in that moment, life was offering them a second chance. In the kitchen, as they put away the last remnants of the party, their mother came over and hugged both of her sons. She said that despite all the pain, this was the greatest birthday gift they could have given their father. The emotion in her voice sealed the atmosphere of reconciliation that filled the house. The son took a deep breath, allowing himself to believe that the future could be different. It wouldn't be easy to forget the years of loneliness, but he was willing to try to rebuild the relationship. After all, as the father always said, life is too short to waste on grudges. When he looked at his brother, he saw not just the rival from the past, but someone willing to change. The gratitude shining in his eyes was enough to provide a glimmer of hope. For the first time, the son allowed himself to think about better days ahead. The party was over, but the new beginning was just starting. And in that home, marked by both hurts and reconciliation, a new story was emerging. The story of two brothers trying together to honor their father's memory and legacy. This story shows that true love goes beyond mistakes and lost time. If you believe that families can rebuild even after the deepest wounds, subscribe to the channel now and don't miss any of our emotional stories. Your next reflection starts right here.